because there's quite a few. So it starts here in Esther chapter 8. That's where we left off. And there was Haman, who had just been hung on the gallows. And remember, Haman, just maybe I'll recap a little bit. Haman had been promoted to be very high in the kingdom. And as he came and went, everybody was commanded to bow. And Mordecai was one who said, I'm not going to, well, he didn't really say much. He just didn't bow. And Haman didn't notice that really at first. As we saw, he didn't really notice that. And there was other people who were bowing, who came and talked to Mordecai and said, Mordecai, you need to bow. You're going to get us all in trouble. How come you don't bow? And they pestered him over and over, day after day, and finally they decided to go and talk to Haman and say, Haman, was there some special thing that you got going with Mordecai here, why he doesn't have to bow and all the rest of us do? And once they brought that up to Haman, he noticed, and it made him very upset. And remember, Haman was a descendant of Agag, who was of the Amalekites from a lot of years before. He was from the Amalekites. Agag was the king that, or the king that King Saul saved alive, and he was supposed to kill all the Amalekites. Well, this man Haman was a descendant of that Agag, and then to make things maybe a little more tricky in the whole story, Mordecai was a descendant of Kish, who was of the family of Saul, who saved Agag alive as a king. So there was some things from history that were clashing here as well. Stories remembered from many years before. And it really came down to worship. It really came all down to worship. Worship was the thing. Was Mordecai going to bow in a type of worship to this Haman, or was he not? And he decided to be faithful to God, and God rewarded him amazingly. Not only that, but after Haman was hanged on his own gallows, Esther came before the king again. And the king held out his golden scepter. She was braver now. Why do you think she's braver now than she had been before to go see the king unasked for, uncalled for? Yeah, she had some experience, right? Some faith. Her faith had been built by previous experience. And so she is going before the king again with a special request. And the king gave her his delight. He was delighted to see her and ask her what she wanted. And she said, we need a new law, king. You remember the laws of the Medes and Persians could not be changed. They could not be altered. They were a permanent law. And so she's asking King Ahasuerus, what can be done about this? Somehow we know we can't change this, but another law could be made. And so that's what happened. The king was happy to have this done. He didn't want the damage to be done, and the Jews all killed throughout the empire, including his own queen. And so he gave permission. He gave not just permission, but he took the ring off his finger and gave it to Mordecai as the official stamp, and he said, go and write a law. It's up to you. Write a new law as you see best fit. So he did. He got counselors, and together they got the scribes, and they wrote out a new law. The new law said, because you couldn't alter the first law, the new law gave the Jews permission on that, remember, 13th day of the 12th month, gave the Jews permission to defend themselves. And that's what happened when it came down to that day. The Jews had made plans to defend themselves. And they did. It says in Shushan, the city where the palace was, the Jews actually slew 500 men that day. And in the other parts of the kingdom, 75,000 were killed who attacked the Jews. But it also says that most of the people were afraid of the Jews. God put fear into them so that they didn't even try to attack. Another thing that happened here was that the 10 sons of Haman, remember Haman had 10 sons. Well, they were of the same mindset as Haman. And they were all hung on the gallows as well. And so the Jews had great rejoicing because God had worked in their behalf. And he used Mordecai to do it. And Mordecai became great. And he was great in the sight of the Jews and in the sight of everyone else because, you know, when they, remember, the original law said that that the people could attack the Jews and then confiscate all their property. They could take that away. Well, when the Jews were attacked by their enemies, they did kill their enemies, but they didn't take any of the property. They left all that. And it appeared to be very fair that the Jews were very good in defending themselves, and they weren't defending themselves to try to get rich. They're just defending themselves. And Mordecai is the one who put this whole plan together, and it was seen as very fair. And so Mordecai said, we need to have a holiday. We need to make this day, the 13th day of the 12th month, a holiday. And remember, Haman asked his magicians and sorcerers to, they cast what they call pur. It was a type of lot casting, but it was really consulting the devil as to what would be the best day, and they called that pur. And so they named this holiday, Mordecai named this holiday Purim. And they were to remember this every year. And they did. They remembered it every year, and it was a big feast day every year. And you know, Purim is still kept by the Jews. They still keep this same holiday. In fact, if we look here, I think it's interesting to read the last verse of the book of Esther. It says, for Mordecai the Jew was next unto the king, King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people and speaking peace to all of his seed. He was well accepted. He was a great leader. He was second in command of the empire. A little bit like Daniel. A little bit like Joseph. Yeah, God has his people in the right place at the right time, and when they act like godly people should act, people respect them. They see how fair they are. They represent God. And many people come to know God. So I looked up some other stuff here that I thought was really good. I want to talk about parallels between the day of Esther and the end of time, the time that we're living in. You see, by this time of Esther, there had already been 2 decrees to go back to the land of Israel and rebuild the town of Jerusalem, the temple, the wall, all that, the city of Jerusalem. There had been 2 decrees, one by Cyrus and another one by Darius. Well, after the first one by Cyrus, the larger number didn't go back. They stayed where they were. They were pretty comfortable. You know, they had property, they had families, they had, well, that's what they knew. And so they didn't go back. And so the ones that stayed and did not go back, they remained unimpressible to later influences. Why do you suppose that is? Yes, prosperity. At first, when you don't listen to the Holy Spirit's voice and he's telling you to do something, the next time he tells you, are you as likely? You aren't as likely. Even later, we're told, when Zechariah, on the 3rd decree, which was the largest one, when Zechariah warned and encouraged them to flee from Babylon, to flee without further delay, most of them did not heed the invitation. And then those of the Jews who did not heed the first 2 invitations to go back to Jerusalem, they failed in heeding the message to flee. They were called upon then to face this terrible crisis, the crisis that came up. They would not have faced that if they were back in Jerusalem, but they had to face it now. They had refused to take advantage of the way of escape that God had provided, and now they were brought face to face with death. Has God made any calls to us as Adventists? Has he called us at all to leave somewhere and go somewhere else? A long time ago, since 1888, is when we were first encouraged to leave cities, large populous cities, for what? The country. Not the wilderness, the country. And why? Was it a good place to raise the children, a family in the city? There were many corrupting influences. That's not a place to raise a family. Is it safe living there? It's not. Is it going to get safer or worse? It's going to get worse. Remember the George Floyd time here not so long ago? Boy, I remember it was shortly after that time that we came down this way looking for property ourselves, not because of anything with George Floyd. Although it happened in Minneapolis, some 20, 25 miles from where we lived, we were out in the country and we were totally unaffected by that. But the realtor that we talked to on the way coming, I talked to on the phone coming down, said, You want an appointment with me? You should have gotten set that up a long time ago. Us realtors here, we're so busy around this area. We don't know why, but we're so busy 7 days a week. We've never been like this. So how come everyone wants to move here? Well, at that time, people were realizing that the city was a dangerous and getting more dangerous place to live, and they were fleeing. I heard about people that were leaving, they just left their house and said, let the bank have it back. We're not even going to try to sell it. We're going to leave now. We're told that we are to flee, and in the country, we will have less harassment. We'll have more freedom for longer. We'll have a place that we have less distractions and we're more able to take time with God and to hear His voice. God has told us some things too. And what are we doing about it? That's one parallelism. You know, when Haman was thinking up his plan and talking with the king, do you think that he was aided in any way with the plan that he came up with? Yeah, we're told here that Satan himself, the hidden instigator of the scheme, was trying to rid the earth of those who preserve the true knowledge of God. In the end here, is Satan going to be riling people up, putting thoughts into their head, and doing the same thing, trying to rid the earth of God's people? He is. He is going to be doing that same thing. And when the crisis came, it demanded some quick, earnest action. And we're told that Esther and Mordecai both realized that unless God would work mightily in their behalf, their own actions, their own efforts would not prevail. They realized that. In the end here, there is going to be some actions where there will be, and we'll look at this more in detail in a little bit, there will be laws made that we will recognize that in our own abilities, we will not be able to save ourselves. We will not be able to, of our own efforts, prevail. And so we will have to do what Esther did. Esther took time for communion with God as the source of her strength. And she told Mordecai, go out into Shushan, into the city, all around, and gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, she said, and fast for me, and pray, and neither eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and I and my maidens will do the same. And then I will go in before the king, and if I perish, I perish. When rough times come, and we realize, like they did, when laws are passed that are showing that, or threatening that we should lose rights, lose privileges, those kinds of things, God's people need to run to Him and do the same thing, fast and pray. We're told that these things are going to happen. We're told about God's people fasting and praying, and then rising up with the Holy Spirit's strength and power, called the latter rain. Now, here's what happened, as we read in the story, but just a little review. After their fasting and praying, events followed in rapid succession. There was first the appearance of Esther before the king. And then there was the marked favor that the king showed her. Only God could have brought that around. And then there was the 2 different banquets that Haman, between the king and the queen, with Haman as the only guest. And then there was the troubled sleep of the king. What a wonderful thing, the way God worked with that. And then, when the king called to have these chronicles read to him, that the scribe who opened it up and read to the king chose just that one spot to read about Mordecai. A providential thing brought about by God. And then the king choosing to honor Mordecai and having Haman do it. What an amazing thing that happened so quickly. And then all the public honor that was shown to Mordecai and the humiliation and fall of Haman when they discovered his wicked plot. Very rapid things that happened after they fasted and prayed. What kind of rapid events are we to look forward to when a law comes demanding that we stop worshiping and getting together as we are here today on Sabbath, and we begin to follow the law, saying that we begin to follow a different day of worship that God has not commanded? And we fast and pray, maybe a little bit like they did 10 days, for 10 days after Jesus' ascension into heaven, remember? They fasted and prayed and they got together. And do you remember the former rain that happened after that? Here, as we look at Esther, the rapid events, the miracles that happened after that. What about that in the latter rain, just before the latter rain? We're told that's going to happen, and that God is going to order events that open doors for his people to share the gospel like has never happened before. It's going to happen. How about here in Esther? I like what Esther 8, chapter 8, verse 17 says, toward the end of that verse. It says that many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Wow. Are many of the people going to become followers of God and his law and what he's asked people to do because of this latter rain? Because God's people are seeking him, and praying and fasting? I believe so. We're also told that on that day, the day of Purim, that angels that excelled in strength had been commissioned by God to protect his people while they stood for their lives, while they attacked the ones who were attacking them, while they defended themselves. Now, there's a little difference here between that day and the end of time. As far as I can see, God's people will not be fighting at all during the end of time. God will do all the fighting. And I like that. I see a difference with that. But God himself sending his angels to protect them, that will definitely happen. We'll take a look at that, a quote that I have about that. The trying experiences that came to God's people in the days of Esther were not peculiar to that age alone, we're told. John the Revelator, looking down the ages to the close of time, has declared, and we can read about this in Revelation 12, verse 17, and you know this verse, I know. It says that the dragon was wroth with the woman. The woman is who? God's church, his people. And he went to make what with the remnant of her seed? War with the remnant of her seed, those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. Well, here we read it. War Satan wants to make on God's people. We're told that the decree that will finally go forth against those remnant people, the remnant people of God, will be very similar to that decree that was issued by Ahasuerus against the Jews. Today, the enemies of the true church see in the little company, we're told, who are keeping the Sabbath commandment, a Mordecai at the gate. And Mordecai at the gate, what was it about? It was about worship, wasn't it? It was all about worship. So at the end of time, it's going to be about what? Worship. That's what's going to make the people upset at God's people, because they don't worship the way that they're demanding that they should, that they want them to. And so it says the reverence of God's people for his law is a constant rebuke to those who have cast off the fear of the Lord and are trampling on his Sabbath. Then another a paragraph here. Well, let me do this one here first. There's something I liked here. It's a whole paragraph, and it's said so well that I thought I had to read it instead of summarize it. Because it says, I saw the saints leaving the cities and the villages, and they were associating together in companies and living in the most solitary places. Now, when in time would this be? Now? No, can't be now. It has to be after a certain event, doesn't it? The close of probation. Would God want his people going and living out in the wilderness where they have no contact with people while there are so many people to be warned and told? No, he wouldn't want that. This is after the close of probation here. And then we're told, at that time, angels provided them food and water. But the wicked, they were suffering from hunger and thirst. Does that sound like God's people are having the hardest time? No, not at all. I see God's people here in a good place. Then, she says, then I saw the leading men of the earth consulting together. The leading men of the earth. Were two leading men of the earth consulting together in the book of Esther? Haman and the king. Yes, that will happen again. And then here it says, and Satan and his angels were busy around those leading men of the earth who were consulting together. Well, we just read that Satan was helping to inspire and consult with Haman. And here it says, I saw a writing, copies of which were scattered in different parts of the land, giving orders that unless the saints should yield their peculiar faith and give up the Sabbath and observe the first day of the week instead, that the people were at liberty after a certain time to put him to death. So, how about a writing that demands people to do things? What do we call that? A law. Was there some kind of law that was put in writing and distributed throughout the Persian Empire in Esther's day? There sure was. And didn't Haman come to the king and say, there's a group of people out here, king, that are not like us. They don't keep your law. They have their own peculiar ways, and it isn't good to keep them around because it's possible that they may arise and start a rebellion against you, king. And you wouldn't want that to happen because they don't keep your laws. That's kind of what it said here about these people. It's giving orders that unless the saints should yield up their peculiar faith and give up the Sabbath. It sounds kind of similar to Esther's day. The people were allowed to put them to death after a certain time. So there was a date for a death decree. And you know, when does the date change? At midnight. It's interesting that we read in another book, Great Controversy, that it's at midnight when God delivers his people, because that's when they are being attacked. Specifically, it's at midnight. Well, that's when the date changes, and they're allowed to do that. But here it says, in some places, before the time for the decree, the decree to be executed, the wicked rushed upon the saints to slay them. But angels of God in the form of men of war fought for them. I think I'd like to be one of God's people at that time, don't you? Satan wished, here we go again, the same old thing. Satan wished to have the privilege of destroying the saints of the Most High, but Jesus bade his angels watch over them. His angels are watching over them again, just as in the days of Esther. God would be honored by making a covenant with those who had kept his law in the sight of the heathen round about them. And Jesus would be honored by translating, without their seeing death, the faithful waiting ones who had so long expected him. And they are expecting him and looking forward to his coming because they love him, right? They love him. They've spent time with him. They've gotten to know his voice. They have had trials. They've had troubles. And God has led them through one after the other after the other. And just like Esther, who is more brave the second time and the third time coming to King Ahasuerus, because of her faith being built up each time, God's people's faith is built up too, more and more. And it should be, hopefully, being built up today more and more, every time we have opportunity. One more thing here. Satan will arouse indignation against the minority who refuse to accept popular customs and traditions. Men of position and reputation will join with the lawless and vile to take counsel against the people of God. Remember when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane? Who came out to arrest him? It was the scribes and Pharisees, right? The leading men of the nation. And who came with them? The mob. That's what it says here. The lawless and the vile. That sounds like mob to me. Satan has the same things going round and round. He uses them over and over. How about this? Wealth, genius, and education will combine to cover his people with contempt. Yes, he uses these things. Persecuting rulers, ministers, and church members will conspire against them. Then it says, by false representations and angry appeals, men will stir up the passions of the people, not having a thus saith the Scriptures to bring against the advocates of the Bible Sabbath, they'll resort to oppressive enactments to supply the lack. Has that happened before? Yes, we saw that in Esther as well. To secure popularity and patronage, legislatures or lawmakers will yield to the demand for Sunday laws. And you know, sometimes we think, and maybe I know we used to think, and now maybe we still do, but it's a little easier to envision some of that happening. But we think in America, how could we ever have a law to worship on Sunday? How could that ever happen? And where does that idea even come from, some will ask? Well, maybe one of these times we'll have to do a little study with that. We'll have to look at that, because it's not just something that somebody came up with. The Bible talks about it. It talks about worship, and it actually even talks about the Sunday worship when we look at it and put it all together. We'll look at that another time. So it isn't the legislatures who come on with this idea, it's the people demanding it, and the legislators, they need to do what the people want, or else they're thrown out, right? And so they do. But those who fear God and cannot accept an institution that violates one of the precepts of the Decalogue, they do not accept this. And on this battlefield will be fought the last great conflict in the controversy between truth and error. This is the battlefield. You know, it started kind of similar to this. In the Garden of Eden, there was a battlefield. It was between two trees. In the end, it's still a battlefield between two things, but it's 2 days. One tree in the Garden of Eden was God's tree, and the other one was where he allowed Satan to be. And in the end of time, we have God's day that he has set up, and we have another day that God has allowed the devil to use as his day, and we'll have the choice between two things. That'll be the last battlefield, we're told. And we're not left in doubt as to the issue. Today, as in the days of Esther and Mordecai, the Lord will vindicate his truth and his people, just as he did then. So it's good news, isn't it? It's really good news. And what makes it good news? How can we be ready for these kinds of things? By spending time in his word, by praying. And every time that we have a choice to stand up for God, we stand up for him. And that makes our faith stronger for the next time and the next time, until the last time we're strong enough to do it. God keeps strengthening us. And those things which we sometimes look at as troubles or trials, God can use to strengthen us. And if we will look at them in that way, instead of just more troubles in life, we always bring our troubles to Him. He'll strengthen us and make us ready for whatever we need to be ready for. We don't have to worry about it because it's really His problem, not ours. We just need to stand faithful with Him. And then He does the rest. Things we know we could never do. And He will do it. Let's sing our closing song. What number is that? 506. 506.